Welcome, friends, to another episode of Belt of Truth Live. We are live here on Wednesday in January at 5:45 p.m. for a special religious liberty update, which I've been looking forward to. We were planning this one a while back and then made some changes in the plans, and now we get to have our guest, Jonathon Cherne, actual religious liberty attorney, who's argued cases before the Supreme Court. He's going to give us some updates about what's going on in the religious liberty landscape in America, and perhaps we can go beyond that as well as we think about kind of how do we learn lessons from COVID and personal liberty, religious liberty matters through the COVID crisis that we've been through. So I'm your host, Scott Ritsema, of course, with Belt of Truth Ministries. I want to welcome each and every one of you who are coming live. I know we don't have a lot live, but we will talk to you guys a little bit later if you have any questions. But also those who are watching the archive, you guys are welcome to come live 5:45 p.m. on Wednesdays anytime. But I'm glad you're joining us after the fact as well. So let's bring up Jonathon. Thank you, Jeremy, for helping us put this on today. And want to welcome Jonathon from Tennessee, a friend, a brother, and a faithful warrior on behalf of liberty. And, you know, I know that there are updates that people maybe aren't aware of the legal landscape on the vaccine mandates and other religious liberty issues in our land. So could you give us first just kind of a briefing on what's going on that maybe people didn't catch in the news that you think is important?
Sure. It's good to be here with you, Scott. And just I'll have to apologize if I cough some. I'm getting over a cold that going through the family, so I'm sure you know how that goes.
Yeah, you and half the society right now is getting over something.
Right, exactly. It's something that every year seems like Christmas, you know. You go visit family, be with a lot of people. We went to GYC, a big convention, Generation of Youth for Christ around New Year's, and just around a lot of people. You can just plan on being sick following that. So
You had a seminar there as well, right?
yeah, I did a five-part seminar on kind of focused on Revelation 13 and religious liberty, and there's a lot of religious liberty issues in Revelation 13. No buy, no sell, mark of the beast, that sort of thing. So went through that and had a great time.
Excellent, excellent. Well, yeah, give us the data dump on recent current events.
Yeah, so there's a lot going on with religious liberty. From just the ground level. I'm still in the trenches doing a lot of vaccine accommodation cases. These cases take time. So even though we're what 3-4 years removed from COVID, we're just now getting through the court systems, in a lot of these cases, and so doing the discovery and gathering our evidence. I did just do a trial recently, my first COVID vaccine trial in LA County against LA County, and so that was a lot of fun. I'd been excited to get one of these cases to trial. Had a great trial. We're still waiting for the final decision on that, and hopefully it will be favorable to my client. But I think it went well. That it was a bench case with a judge, and so that's why you don't get that immediate decision like you do with a jury that has to sit there and deliberate till they come to a conclusion. There is a recent case that was just argued yesterday, actually, in front of the Second Circuit, and that's something I think we all need to uh, keep our eyes on. It was the Bangor Christian School case, and in that case, the state of Maine had a policy that they would not allow uh, state funds to go to Christian education, but they allowed vouchers to go to individuals who were going to non-Christian or, well, non-religious schools, not necessarily targeting Christian. And so, that was litigated a couple of years back in a case called Espinoza, and that was against the state of Maine, where Maine had the law saying that if your kid wants to go to a private school, we'll give a voucher so that they can help pay for it. The state would provide funding for that, unless it was a school that taught religious education. And so then the state said, we're not going to fund religious education. And so that went up to the Supreme Court a few years ago. And that was a case Carson versus Macon, not Espinoza. I misspoke just a second ago. But anyways, so in that Carson versus Macon case, the Supreme Court overturned that and said, the state of Maine is discriminating against religious schools, and basically that anytime a state funds or allows public funds to go to private entities, it has to allow it to go to religious entities as well. It can't discriminate on that matter. So it really kind of changed the constitutional analysis of what is a violation of the First Amendment. And so that was a big landmark decision. And so Maine was forced to then give vouchers, give money to students that wanted to go to schools that taught religious education. And so what they did, immediately following that Supreme Court decision, is they said, okay, that's fine. We'll give the money, but only if your schools follow, our ideology on LGBT issues, and sexuality, that sort of thing. And so if your school does not, then we won't give the funds to them. So in essence, the state was trying to force schools, religious institutions to accept the state's dogmas or ideology, and was not going to allow schools to follow their own religious convictions or beliefs. And so that case, one of the schools, the Bangor Christian School, filed suit saying, this is against our religious beliefs, to accept the state's ideology on LGBTQ issues. And so they filed a lawsuit, and that just was argued yesterday in front of the second, no, it's First Circuit in May. So started in front of the First Circuit yesterday. So it'll be interesting to see what decision comes out of that and whether that goes up to the Supreme Court. So I think it's fascinating. We obviously kind of saw this coming, that, if a state's going to be required to give public funds to religious institutions, that it would want to start putting strings attached to those funds. And so this will be a big case if it goes up to the Supreme Court to decide, can a government attach funds to, or attach strings to funds that it's giving? Can it require religious institutions to adopt the state's ideology on certain issues that maybe conflict with that religion's own beliefs and tenets? So I think that's something to watch. There's also another case that is being discussed at the Supreme Court in 2 days on the 10th. And this is a case that comes out of Oklahoma. The Oklahoma school district approved an application by the Catholic Church to have a publicly funded public Catholic school. It's kind of weird to say that in the same sentence, but this would be the first time in our U.S. history where we have a publicly funded religious school. And so the Department of Education, the school board or whatever, approved the Catholic church there. I think it's Saint Isidore was going to be the name of the school. Anyways, this Catholic school to be fully funded by the state of Oklahoma. And so the state attorney general then sued to stop this from happening, which the state Department of Education or school board commission, whoever it was that voted on it. So it's you kind of have the state warring against itself. And that case went up to the Oklahoma Supreme Court, which last fall was struck down as unconstitutional for the government to be fully funding, a Catholic or really any religious education, funding the school directly. And so then the Catholic school has appealed to the United States Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will be deciding on Friday whether or not they will take that case. So I'm hoping that they don't, because in the Oklahoma Supreme Court case ruling stands and that it's unconstitutional for a state to establish a religious public school. But I'm a little concerned that the Supreme Court will take it, and that it could reverse the Oklahoma Supreme Court. It was interesting. I was at a meeting, a religious liberty meeting in Los Angeles earlier last year, and actually the attorneys representing the state of Oklahoma, not the state of Oklahoma, representing the school, the Catholic school, they were pretty optimistic that they have a favorable Supreme Court and that this court will hear the case and grant, say it's discrimination not to allow them to have a Catholic school fully funded by public funds. And the guy that is representing the Catholic school actually used to be Justice Alito's law clerk. I think he also clerked for Neil Gorsuch when he was on the appellate court. So that's definitely a case to watch. I think that would, just be the complete ending of, the Establishment Clause, where, our government is just fully funding religious education. I like to think, religious education, if it can't be supported and sustained by the religion that's pushing it, maybe it's not worth an education being had, And so I think churches that should have an obligation to fund their own religious education, and people who, support that can donate their dollars to that, but the government shouldn't be the one that is having to support and sustain, religious institutions.
No, we don't need their help. We don't want it.
Right.
And those who do, they're bringing church and state closer together, and they both function best when they're not flirting so much. And it's like oil and water, right? And you've got that Establishment Clause, as you mentioned, in the First Amendment of the Constitution, that says that the government may not make any laws respecting an establishment of religion. So they're supposed to keep their hands off, and that goes both directions, right? So
Mm-hmm.
then the other clause in the First Amendment, the other religious freedom clause in the First Amendment, of course, is the free exercise clause. And that probably transitions to some of these vaccine cases you're talking about as well, right? So is there any new case law? Or have there been other decisions in addition to the ones that you've been a part of, where we're starting to see some precedent that applying for exemptions from COVID vaccine mandates, the employer mandates, and other mandates, that you can do that on a religious basis, according to, what is it, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, that gives you the freedom to exercise your religion unless it imposes an undue hardship on the employer. Did I get all the terminology right?
Right. Yeah. So the COVID cases, at least at the appellate level, have been very favorable to to employees who've lost their job. Uh, we've had a lot of success in pretty much all the circuits except for maybe the First Circuit, where lower judges have thrown out cases, or they've said, well, this was not a part of the individual's uh, church's beliefs, or they said, there's a mix of, political beliefs and religious beliefs, so we're throwing it out. So you had all these lower court judges that would, throw out the case, but then, a lot of those were appealed, and the appellate courts, really given us some favorable case law, favorable decisions, where they've said, hey, it doesn't matter what your church believes, it's up to your belief. And that's what religious liberty is all about. It's your individual belief, what your own connection with God or whatever supreme being you follow. It's you following that conviction is what matters in the eyes of the court, and legally. And so we've received some, just great decisions that reaffirm that. And again, this is at the appellate level. And so at the appellate level, all the courts in the districts underneath that appellate court have to follow that decision. So it gives binding precedent in all the district courts underneath that. So, like, uh, for district courts that aren't in that jurisdiction, though, it gives compelling compelling law, legal analysis for them to follow, even though it's not necessarily required. And so, so we've had some really good decisions in that case, or in our COVID cases. I have a couple COVID cases on appeal in the Ninth Circuit. One is against Kaiser, and the other is for a group of firefighters out of Washington State. And in both of those cases, the trial judge threw out the case. And so we're hoping to make some good case law again and get those overturned. And we've had really good decisions already out of the Ninth Circuit regarding COVID vaccination. And so I think we have a pretty good shot at it. My case against Kaiser is interesting because in that case, my client was completely remote. So they didn't see any patients, they didn't see any coworkers, they didn't see any customers or vendors or any other employee when carrying out their job duties for Kaiser. They worked from their home and they worked completely remotely. And so even the CMS mandate, Center for Medicare, Medicaid Services mandate, didn't even apply to them. They had, if you read that mandate, that only applied to workers who had or could have contact with patients, or other individuals. And so, my client obviously didn't have any, and yet they were still, despite them being completely remote and doing their job all from home, Kaiser still tried to require them to get vaccinated. And so the judge said, well, it's a noble purpose, trying to better the community. Well, that's not Kaiser's job. It's not their job to better the community. And, they can't just force an employee to take some sort of medical drug, because they have this noble goal of bettering the community. It has, the only way an employer can require it, like a vaccine or something, is if it impacts its business. And here it clearly didn't impact Kaiser's business. And so we're appealing the judge's decision. and we think we have a really good shot at it. And I think, in this case, we also had a constitutional privacy claim, and so that sort of claim has not been discussed by the Ninth Circuit. And so we're hoping to make some good case law there that will hopefully help many other people when they have that same sort of scenario arise.
That's fantastic. Now, I've got a couple of more theological questions for you. And before I ask them, folks should be aware you also run American Christian Ministry in partnership with some others as well. How can people find, like, what is that ministry, and how can people find your stuff there?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we have American Christian Ministries. You can go to our website, americanchristianministries.org, or you can look us up in the App Store or the Google Play Store, American Christian Ministries. And we have over 8,000 presentations on different Bible topics that you can listen to, while you're driving, or you're doing the dishes, or, whenever, mowing the lawn. Um, and just uplifting, a great way to get you through your day and to keep your mind focused on Christ. So encourage you to check it out. Also, our YouTube page, we're starting to put our presentations on YouTube, so you can find us on our YouTube channel, American Christian Ministries, if you type that in. So yeah, come check us out.
So, your work, a lot of it is the intersection then between the Bible and the religious liberty legal landscape. And so, as I'm thinking about the duty of a Christian to render unto Caesar and to submit ourselves to the governing authorities that God has put into place, Romans 13, that's important for us as Christians to be law-abiding citizens that participate in civil order and render the proper submission to the laws of the land. And then occasionally in history, the law of the government comes into conflict with the law of God. And at that point, we say with Peter and John, right, that we must obey God rather than man. And so I think most Christians get that concept. When it came to the COVID vaccine, I remember there was a little bit of a kerfuffle over this, because many Christians were saying that I feel that it is my religious duty to apply for an exemption and exercise my religious liberty and to not take that vaccine. And then I remember some were impressing upon those people this statement: well, this vaccine and taking vaccines is not a matter of the law of God and the Ten Commandments. It's not in the Decalogue. And so implication really ought to just render unto Caesar in this respect, because it's not one of the Ten Commandments that is at play. So you can't exercise your religious liberty. What do you have to say about that?
Well, there's a lot there. I think, not every belief is in the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments was God's law that He gave, to man, and it's also, obviously a description of His character. And it's deeper than just the words in the Ten Commandments, as Jesus showed us on the Sermon on the Mount, where he said, you say if you kill, that you sin. Well, I say if you hate a man in your heart, you've already sinned. And so it's deeper than just the words there. But as far as in relation to the COVID vaccine, a lot of different people didn't take it for different reasons, and I can't, vouch for everybody of why they did it. But, the fact is that in this country, we have the freedom of religion and to act on our religious beliefs. It doesn't say you only have the freedom to act on religious beliefs that are memorialized in the Ten Commandments, but, it's your personal relationship with God, and that impacts a lot of people in a lot of different ways. It impacts people in what they wear. Well, the Ten Commandments doesn't say anything about what you wear. Some people believe that you shouldn't eat certain things, eat certain foods, and uh, that's not in the Ten Commandments either, but people do that for religious reasons. And so, a lot of the choices that we make, religious choices, or at least my clients, uh, it's not necessarily because it was something that was in the Ten Commandments, but because of their convictions, either reading the Bible or in prayer with God, and those sort of things. So, um, the law does not just protect things that are in the Ten Commandments.
Yeah. Well, some would see it in the first commandment as well. It's, health choices are worship choices because it says in Romans 12, verse 2, that we are to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice. That's worship language. It actually says in your reasonable service or spiritual act of worship, offer your body as a living sacrifice. So the body is very much involved with worship. It also says our body is a temple of the living God. So for a lot of people, the worship commandments, the first four commandments, especially that first commandment, have no other gods before me. These things are matters of physical choices, like you said, what we eat, whatever you eat or drink, or whatever you do it all to the glory of God, the Bible says.
Mm-hmm.
So in those health choices, we are rendering worship unto God, which actually brings up
Well,
the
also
third.
the sixth commandment, thou shalt not kill. I had clients, because of the connection of the vaccines to the to aborted fetal tissue, they felt that it violated that commandment, and if they partook of the vaccines, then they would be complicit, in that, and that it would be a sin for them. So there is, that as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And maybe even your own potential death. I mean, people hear these died suddenly things and then they're just told, well, you're a conspiracy theorist, take it. The sixth commandment doesn't apply here because you have the wrong, view on things. But how about the phrase that was going around like, well, this is a public health issue, not a religious liberty issue. What do you say to that?
I think, religious liberty issues don't fit in a neat box. It's not like, okay, here's a religious liberty issue over here, and here's public health, and here's a social issue, and here's a political issue. And there's a lot of times there's overlap in these things. And diet is an easy way to show that. There's a lot of, the whole uh, Jewish religion, they eat kosher because of religious issues, but it also, what they eat impacts their health and their body as well. And myself, as a Seventh Day Adventist, I eat a certain way because of religious issues, but also health issues. Just because I do it for multiple reasons doesn't mean that I'm not afforded a um, I don't give up my religious rights because I don't do it exclusively for religious reasons. And case law has been clear on that as well. Some of the circuit courts that we've seen, I think there was a case, I think it was against the Mayo Clinic, actually, a COVID vaccine case, where they were saying, well, they were not, taking the vaccine because of all these other reasons as well that they put in their exemption letter. And the court said, well, just because it had, other, scientific or personal health reasons, doesn't mean that you don't also have to accommodate the religious reason for why they do it. I know, like, I believe in a 6 literal day creation. Is that a scientific or is that religious? It's both, right? And there's scientific evidence for, the world being made in 6 days, 6 literal days, and there's also a religious component if you read the first chapter of Genesis. And so, lots of times religious beliefs, in fact, probably more often than not, have both a religious component mixed with some other, either scientific or personal or health or, other types of beliefs or ideas.
I'm going to read a statement from one of the most massively circulated Christian publications out there. The author stated back in the summer of 2021, "I'm not arguing for mandatory vaccination, but I am saying that your choice not to be vaccinated will appropriately come with limitations on community participation, work, and travel." How do you respond to that argument from a legal mind in the Christian community that many Christians have taken issue with that statement?
I think that, people were speaking out of fear, and, there was a lot of irrational ideas and thoughts being thrown around, and Um, obviously that's not the laws of this country. We have religious freedom, and in this case, it wasn't the situation where, you had that you had a vaccine that even worked, that kept uh, people from spreading COVID, or that kept individuals from getting it. And so, you know, to make a statement that people who don't take it should be confined, well, everyone should be confined then, because even the people that got it can still spread COVID. So, I mean, it didn't even make any sense from a scientific or just practical, uh, factual scenario.
Yeah, I remember it was summer of 2021, actually, right before that statement was made, that the CDC director on the news said, well, our vaccines can't prevent transmission. So doesn't the entire foundation for mandates collapse at that point when the vaccine can't prevent you from getting and transmitting the virus? You can't mandate it on the basis of you're a public health threat by walking around unvaccinated because you're going to get it and transmit it, and the vaccinated aren't. So you're right about the irrationality of that really started to set in. That's where some social psychology comes in. You're like, there was something not right in the mindset of the group mind there. I won't ask you to speak to that unless you want to, but we don't,
Yeah,
of course, have.
we've used the CDC statements. What I like to ask employers, when I'm doing discovery in these cases, is did you follow all the CDC recommendations? Were you following their statements and all? And so then you get their admission that they were, and then you have their admission that they knew that it could still spread COVID, and so it really undermines the employer's uh, undue hardship defense. That it would be an undue hardship to have my this unvaccinated employee working there when they knew that the vaccine didn't prevent the spread of COVID in the workplace and didn't prevent people from still contracting it.
We're aware also that there were therapeutics, and there was, getting your vitamin D level up, maintaining a healthy weight, and, the 8 laws of health: nutrition, exercise, water, sunlight, temperance, air, rest, trust in God. If you're living all those things, it brings the risk from COVID way down. So should we have mandated those? Should we have mandated people take vitamin D? I mean, what's your belief about health, public health, and liberty in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be good to recommend those things. I'm not big on mandates personally. I think the best method is, kind of God's method. Come, let us reason together, he says. Let's educate people, and I think that's where the church and the church health system can do a great job, pushing and educating people on how to live healthier lives, and then when, these sorts of diseases and sicknesses arise, your body is a lot more equipped and able to deal with them and fight them off. And so, uh, I don't think we should mandate or force people to, but I think it'd be good to educate people too. And why wouldn't you want to, improve your health, which would improve your quality of life?
Our denomination that you and I are part of, many of our listeners are part of, Seventh-day Adventists, have been very active in religious liberty work for a long time. And I remember during the COVID vaccine mandates, those who were speaking up in defense of religious liberty, in defense of those who were being mandated upon, there were statements made by some that you guys are making a raid upon the government. You have a rebellion against the government happening here. How do you frame religious liberty in the context of this isn't about rebellion and making a raid upon the government? This, how do you respond to that criticism that was made at that time?
The Our laws for religious liberty are there for us to use. They're not just there to, put a plaque up on the wall. And we put those up from the founding because of situations like COVID and any other time where you are trying to follow your religious convictions, and the government or your employer is preventing you from doing that. And so if there's the saying, if you don't use it, you lose it, right? Well, I don't know how much that applies to the law, but if you don't use it, then you lose something, and you also lose the opportunity to educate others, on our freedoms and on your religious faith as well. And so, I don't, I also heard people say, oh, this is, harmful to religious liberty, by, uh, bringing COVID vaccine cases. But, I found the exact opposite. I think it's been very helpful for religious liberty. We, like I said before, have got a ton of great appellate court decisions that now I can cite to in future cases, whether they're dealing with praying at work or keeping the Sabbath or, whatever the case may be, because of this huge um, thrust of vaccine cases and the great quotable language that we've gotten from the different circuit courts. I can cite to those cases going forward. And so I think it's been very helpful to religious liberty. Uh,
Absolutely.
and to bring these cases, and also just to remind employers that you can't tread on people's rights, um, and that they need to follow Title VII. They can't discriminate, and so I think it's been helpful in that context as well.
And I've come over to your side on a conversation you and I had years ago about, corporations are not the government, right? And so the Bill of Rights protects us from the government. And so on a strict constitutional level, you might say, well, maybe that's not appropriate, but we have that law on the books. So let's protect people is kind of the mindset there. But then in recent years, it seems like we have a growing corporatocracy where there is more governance actually happening through big tech platforms, through big pharma collusion and revolving doors with government, and just there's a higher degree of corporate power exercised that I've really come to respect the work of religious liberty attorneys even more. But I've got a question about the the concept of conscience. Not all conscientious choices are correct, right? You could say, well, my conscience is telling me I need to do this, and one person may be going the wrong direction and another person the right direction. And I remember hearing this perspective from one of the most prominent medical voices, also happens to be a Christian, and it kind of saying, those of you who are appealing to conscience on the vaccine mandates to get an exemption and defend those who want an exemption, you have to consider that maybe you have a bad conscience. So has our religious liberty work done any work in defending those, maybe that you don't even disagree, that you don't even agree with, you might completely disagree with their religious perspective on? Do we endorse the principle of free exercise of religion, even if their conscience we think is a little off, as long as they're not harming somebody?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the purpose of religious liberty is, religious liberty for all. For too long throughout our this world's history, everyone wanted religious liberty, but come to find out when they ended up gaining power, it was just religious liberty for them, right? Religious liberty for me, but not for thee. But that was the beautiful thing about America is religious liberty for even the minority. And so I've represented, all sorts of religious faiths. In fact, right now, most of my clients aren't, Seventh Day Adventists, which I am. I've represented Muslims, Sikhs, Jews, all sorts of different Christian denominations, and I think, a rising tide lifts all ships, right? And so, we need to be helping all religious faiths, and I think it helps further religious liberty to do so. Additionally, yeah, it was interesting because before the pandemic, you know, religious liberty attorneys, those I worked with, they would represent people of all different faiths and different ideas that they didn't believe in necessarily. But then when it came to the vaccine mandates, it was like, oh, well, that's not our religious belief, or, people's mindsets kind of changed and got a little funny. And so I've had to have conversations with people and try to remind them about, we don't, just because we don't agree with somebody's religious belief doesn't mean that we can't help them. And, I think that is hopefully a lesson that um, many people learned in our church. I know our church's religious liberty departments, they've don't just help Seventh Day Adventists, they help people of all faiths, and hopefully they continue to do that as well.
Yeah. It's if you're going to say only those with the correct conscientious belief get to exercise their freedom, then who's going to dictate what is the correct belief, right? Now all of a sudden you have an establishment of religion, or you have a totalitarian state that's an atheist
Right,
state, one or the
right.
other. And so neither we don't want to go that direction. We should encourage people to study the Bible, and we should teach the Bible, and we should try to get people to believe what is the truth. But at the end of the day, leaving them free is a principle that I really appreciate that you and your colleagues believe in and practice. Do you guys ever get accused of, as religious liberty attorneys, or even just as people who aren't attorneys and aren't formally in the work, who are trying to advocate for individual conscience, do you ever get in here you're being political? And what do you say to that?
Um, I didn't really get that until the vaccine mandates, where people were saying, "Well, this is political." I think it was because a lot of people, you know, on the one side didn't feel that this was a religious liberty issue, and that this, you know, and so they just put it in a their own box that this is a political issue and not a religious liberty issue. And so then, with that framework, um, for them, they deemed it to be political. But it might not have been a religious liberty issue for them, but that doesn't mean it's not a religious liberty issue for others. It's kind of like wearing a headscarf. For me, that's not a religious liberty issue, but for Miss Samantha, who applied to work at Abercrombie and Fitch, and was denied a job because it didn't fit their look policy. The United States Supreme Court found that that was a religious liberty issue. And so, this goes back to what I said at the beginning. Religious liberty issues are dependent on the individual. They're subjective. And so, and just because it's not a religious liberty issue for you doesn't mean that it's not a religious liberty issue for somebody else. And so, yeah, it didn't really, in my work, I've been doing this since 2012. And it wasn't until the COVID vaccines came out that, you know, people are saying, well, this religious liberty word is really political. And so I think it just kind of had to do with the whole narrative and the push to try to get everyone vaccinated and just try to make anybody who wouldn't get vaccinated to feel as bad and awful of a person as possible.
Did you hear before the COVID vaccine controversies, this is a distraction from, preaching the three angels' messages. That's Revelation 14. Before Christ returns, it is the mission and calling of the remnant in the last days. It is religious liberty work in general a distraction from that? I know, of course, is no, but, expound upon that. And then was that also an argument you heard that only arose recently? Because that's kind of telling that that was never, these things weren't stated till more recently, but maybe there's something else going on.
Yeah, there's a quote from one of the founders of our church, Ellen White, and she says that the banner of religious liberty has been passed into our hands. And so it's really, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, with our understanding of Bible prophecy and all that, we're supposed to be the champions of religious liberty. And, it's not something that, is different than the three angels message or distracting from it, but it's something that they go hand in hand, and it's something that our church is supposed to be waving the banner high uh, for religious liberty.
Yeah, I don't hear that when we're doing the medical evangelism work, for example. You're helping people in that way, or welfare ministry, or whatever, disaster relief, and you're doing that to care about people. And as a part of that, you're presenting the gospel and our prophetic message and caring about their temporal and eternal interests. And I never hear, well, that's a distraction from the three angels' messages to do those things, the disaster relief, the medical work, etc. But sometimes religious liberty gets that accusation. But isn't this just a work that is showing care and concern for the marginalized, for the persecuted, and no matter where they're coming from? That's so beautiful that it's offered to people from all backgrounds. Even like we don't actually believe like you believe, but we believe in your freedom and we will
Mm,
defend it. And what a soul winning enterprise. And that's really what gets you up in the morning, isn't it? With American Christian Ministries and with your religious liberty work, it's like you are marching to the heartbeat of prophecy. You just did a whole seminar series at GYC on religious liberty and Bible prophecy. They do go hand in glove, don't they?
yes, yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I do a lot of most of my work with the Pacific Union, and very thankful for them. They have a mindset of religious liberty for all, and they actually fund cases, not just for Seventh-day Adventists, but for all religious faiths. And they're actually funding almost all of my COVID vaccine cases as well, the Pacific Union of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And so, I'm just thankful for them and their, understanding of that religious liberty really is not just for Seventh-day Adventists, but for all people, all different beliefs, even if people believe differently than our church believes, or even if people have a different idea about the vaccine than our church's statement. And so, they're willing to, help people follow their convictions And I think that's really what it's all about.
Hey, I want to go just for a couple minutes, and then we're going to let you go get a good night of sleep. Make sure you get it recovered from this sickness so you can keep working hard for the Lord. But one
Well,
of our viewers says, "Well, I don't believe that the state should be funding religiously affiliated schools. For those who do put their kids in religious schools, they should at least be able to deduct the funds from taxes." I'm interested in your take on tax deductions because that's not a fund from that. They're not receiving monies from the government, but we have, Christian churches and ministries, Belt of Truth Ministries, issues tax receipts that people can use as write-offs on their taxes when they donate to the ministry. American Christian Ministries probably also. So,
mhm.
what's from a legal perspective, is that different in kind and substance from receiving funding from the government?
Yeah, I think that the issue that I have, especially with Oklahoma, is direct funding, you know, to of the school. Whereas, like with the voucher program, or um, with giving a donation and getting a tax deductible receipt, that's up to the individual. They're deciding where, either where they go to school, or with the donation, where they give their funds. And so there's kind of a layer removed where and the benefit is to the individual. Obviously the institution and the nonprofit is benefited by receiving the money from the individual for a donation, but the tax deductible portion is, the benefit goes to the individual, not to the institution. And so, I see a difference there in that then versus, directly funding, or directly sustaining religious institutions.
Yeah, I agree. It is different. Well, one more viewer says, what was fair for one, speaking of Kaiser, what was fair for one was fair for all. Sounds like Kaiser's stance. No individualized plan for employees, huh? So that's more of a comment than a question. Thank you, Beth, for chiming in. Jonathan, you want to comment on that? And if not, in addition to that, if you want to, um, just what do you want to leave our viewers with tonight as we wrap up our conversation?
Yeah, just a quick comment. I mean, she makes a point when you look at under Title VII, religious accommodations, it's supposed to be an individualized assessment. And so, yeah, Kaiser and all employers have to look at, can I accommodate this individual? And then what was your last
Oh, just what do
question?
you want to leave our listeners with
Oh,
tonight?
yeah. Okay, thank you. I would just say, just remember that, just because something's not your religious belief, that it might be somebody else's, and to allow them to follow the convictions of their own conscience. Doesn't mean you can't share your beliefs and why you believe the way you believe, but just give people that freedom and that latitude to follow their convictions, just as you want to follow yours. And recognize that people aren't always going to be convicted the same way, and that's the beauty of, of freedom. That's the beauty of America. And if we all got that, I think this would be a better place.
If God doesn't force, who do I think I am to force somebody?
Right,
This
exactly.
is this is not how God operates. Let's behold Jesus Christ and model our methods after His by His grace. And Jonathan, I got to send you a bottle of this. It may come late. The Revitagard, Jeremy reminded me, thanks to our sponsor, revitaliving.health. And I've got something going around in my family. I've been spraying this stuff. You just keep throat coated there when you're in public places. You're at Christmas, and we're obviously past Christmas now, but you feel something coming on, give it a spray. Revitaliving.health. We got the nasal spray too. I won't make you guys watch me spray that one on my nose right now, but yeah, revitaliving.health is what helps keep us doing what we're able to do here. And of course, support American Christian Ministries. They could use your views over there and on their YouTube. We'll link to that in the description, and support them with your offerings as well as Belt of Truth Ministries. So, and thanks to our producer, Christian Digital Network. From likes to lives changed. Please subscribe, scan that QR code, and subscribe to CDN's YouTube channel. Thank you, Jeremy, for manning the controls again, and thank you everybody for joining us. And
Thank
we'll
you,
see you
guys.
again next week on Belt of Truth Live, 5:45 p.m. Wednesdays.
Appreciate it, Scott.